Sometimes subtle changes can have profound implications, especially when those subtle changes are said by the President of the United States of America, the most powerful military force on the planet. It can mean a lot. That really comes into play when in the current situation in terms of the funding or the attempt to fund Ukraine for its second or for this next iteration of funding. President Zelensky was just in town and he visited with the president, with members of the Senate, and with members of the House to try to convince them that it was actually in their interest to continue funding and that the situation is very important. Many things have happened both around that time and since that time, and there's been a very subtle change that could have profound implications said by President Biden directly related to this, which we're going to see in just a second. But first of all, let's start off by saying why John Kirby, one of the White House spokesmen, is trying to convince the American people that this is really something that's in our interest. And in fact, it's almost World War III type serious.
If Mr. Putin gets his way, he hasn't changed his mind. He still wants to take Ukraine and wipe it off the map. That puts him right up against the eastern flank of NATO. And who's to say that he won't make a move on a NATO nation? He's already threatened some NATO nations with aggressive rhetoric. It's entirely possible that we could then be involved in a larger war in the European continent with American troops having to be involved because of our Article 5 commitments to defend our NATO allies. That's how serious this can get.
Okay, so he's saying that, wow, if Putin wins, then, man, he's going on to NATO country. He's going to, who knows, invade the Baltics. He's going to go after Poland. Maybe he's going to head down to Germany. Maybe he wants to go to Paris. Who knows? He may be trying to do that. But that's the threat. That's like, oh, my God, we have to give them this money, implying that if we give them the money, that somehow that's going to prevent Ukraine or Russia from winning against Ukraine. But he said that's what Putin would do. But we have now actually Putin, in his own words, just earlier today, laying out what his view actually is.
Мы достигнем своих целей, о которых вы сказали. Теперь вернемся к этим целям. Они не меняются. Вот я напомню, о чем мы тогда говорили. О денацификации Украины, о демилитаризации, о ее нейтральном статусе. Теперь, что касается демилитаризации. Ну, не хотят договариваться, ну что ж, мы тогда вынуждены принимать другие, в том числе военные меры.
So let's see how he's talking about that. As you notice there, he's pretty confident here. Now we're talking after 22 months of war, and the Ukraine side, after 6 months of preparation, then has spent the last 6 months trying to do an offensive operation, and it didn't work. As we've talked about many times here, it barely even moved the needle. And by the way, even those tiny gains are now at risk of being lost. So you can see why Putin's going to be a little bit cocky. But now then, he also added in some of the other reasons for his confidence when he added this.
Сегодня Украина почти ничего уже не производит. Ну, пытаются что-то там еще сохранить. Но почти ничего не производят. Все привозят, извините за моветон, ну, на халяву все привозят. Но эта халява когда-то может и закончиться. И, судя по всему, так и заканчивается.
So he's, of course, directly talking about what's been going on in Washington. He's been watching all of these things develop just like we have. And he sees that there's a lot of reticence on whether the United States should even pay any money. But as anybody can see, we've been talking about this significantly frequently, is that even if the Congress does eventually give some money, it's not going to be anywhere near enough. And as John Mearsheimer said on our show a couple of days ago, money's not what Ukraine needs. The war is not going to be won or lost based on money. John Kirby's wrong in his assertion that we just need to give this money so that Putin can't do all these other things. But now then we have President Biden trying to make the case for it. And well, first of all, just listen to what he says here, and then I'm going to point something out on the backside of it.
And Ukraine will emerge from this war proud, free, and firmly rooted in the West unless we walk away. We'll continue to supply Ukraine with critical weapons and equipment as long as we can. But without supplemental funding, we're rapidly coming to an end of our ability to help Ukraine respond to the urgent operational demands that it has.
So he said there, we are going to supply them if we get the money for as long as we can. Now, if that sounds a little familiar to you, it's because what he has said for the past 22 months until this speech, it was more like this. Gary, if we have that, if you can roll that.
The fact of the matter is that I believe we'll have the funding.
This is from 6 months ago.
Support Ukraine as long as it takes. And I believe that we're going to, that support will be real, even though you hear some voices today on Capitol Hill about whether or not we should continue.
Well, those voices have indeed risen up and said even more now. And it's very clear that that money's not coming. Now, you saw that there was a press conference between President Zelensky and President Biden in part of his meeting there. And Biden was, giving him assurances, just like he started off to in this speech here. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, there was some precedence for this a couple of years ago when the president of Afghanistan came to the White House, and we had this exchange.
The partnership between Afghanistan and the United States is not ending. It's going to be sustained, and our troops may be leaving, but support for Afghanistan is not ending in terms of support and maintenance of their helping maintain their military as well as economic and political support.
That was June 2021, 2 months before the entire edifice fell apart and totally collapsed. So what President Biden was telling him then is, yeah, we're going to keep going. We're not going anywhere, except 2 months later when the thing fell apart, then we're out. And even actually by that time, we were already planning on withdrawing. The withdrawal was underway, and he's trying to convince everybody that we're staying. But everyone knew, everyone saw the writing on the wall. It was as clear as a bell. So those reassurances meant absolutely nothing. And the situation now is not much different, because the situation on the ground in Ukraine in some regards is similar to the dire situation that we saw in Afghanistan in the latter stages there. Afghanistan military was not going to be able to defeat the Taliban. They, in fact, were already being pushed back in many areas, and they were losing ground. The government was continuing to show that it was incapable of handling the situation, of even doing its normal governance. The writing was on the wall. The Americans were coming out. And then the thing collapsed. In Ukraine right now, we have a very similar dynamic where Russia has blunted all of the Ukraine offensive capacity. Now then they're starting to push back on that. Ukraine is running out of men. It's running out of tanks. It's running out of air defense missiles. It's definitely running low on artillery shells. And there's just not enough of those to continue going on. The writing is on the wall that it's not going to come. And then, by the way, we keep hearing that this war is about, fighting for freedom and democracy. But while Zelensky was here, he also went on Fox News and had this exchange with Bret Baier.
You consolidated Ukraine's TV outlets, that you ruled out holding elections next spring, calling for unity. But then the mayor of Kyiv says that you're turning it into an authoritarian state. What do you say to critics who are saying that?
Think about the war. Think about how to defend our people. Travel to the front line. Ask people, ask soldiers what they need. Do this. Not build roads for today. Don't do it. Spend all your money to the weapon, to the drones. We have only one enemy. This is Putin.
But you'll stand from democracy going forward?
Yes, of course. And of course, because we are really defending democracy and we are really defending freedom.
That's been one of his claims almost from the outset. This is not just a war between Russia and Ukraine. We're on the front lines for you. We're actually fighting for you. We're democracy and freedom. Something doesn't sound quite right about that. Gary, run that first clip back again.
You consolidated Ukraine's TV outlets, that you ruled out holding elections next spring, calling for unity. But then the mayor of Kyiv says that you're turning it into an authoritarian state. What do you say to critics who are saying that?
Think about the war. Think about how to defend our people. Travel to the front line. Ask people, ask soldiers what they need. Do this. Not build roads for today. Don't do it. Spend all your money.
He's angry now. He's just getting mad. And he starts to tell Bret Baier, well, we're fighting a war and you should stop doing this. He didn't even answer the question. Ukraine has gotten rid of all the political parties that Zelensky didn't like. He shut down all the media outlets that he didn't like. He's even shut down many of the religious organizations that he didn't like. And the corruption is through the roof. He didn't even answer any of those. One of his former senior aides, Arestovich, was saying he's turning into an actual totalitarian. That's what his own people are saying. The mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, is also saying the same kinds of things. This is not a democracy. So let's get this on the table right now. When you're talking about whether the United States should continue to give money to a process that's not working, we have to say, what are we trying to support here? Oh, sure, Zelensky says, as soon as everything's fine and back to order, then we're going to go ahead and we'll get back to democracy. But until then, we're not going to. And when I'm directly asked, as he was, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to answer a different question. I wish that Brett Baer had asked him, a good tough follow-up of, that ain't what I asked you. What about these things? These people are saying this. This is not conjecture. This is a fact. And the corruption is also a fact. He fired his minister of defense during the summer because of corruption. 5 of his senior officials went with him because of corruption. And you can assure that that's not the end of it. That was just one piece that was found. So it's across the board. It's rampant. And that's common knowledge. People know that. So the question is, do we want to send our money for something that is not democratic? Zelensky himself has actually said, we're not going to have the presidential election. There's a war going on. We can't have that. And the reason is because internally, and this doesn't get much coverage at all in the Western press, there is a lot of trouble politically, internally for Zelensky. His reputation is falling by the day. His numbers are falling by the day. If he has a presidential election, I believe it was scheduled for March, then he probably would have lost, or at least it would have been a good chance. So in case that might happen, he's just not going to have the election. He's just going to say, no, we can't do it. It's too risky. Well, isn't that interesting? Because one of his neighbors, let's see if I can remember who it was. Oh, yeah, Vladimir Putin, the totalitarian. He is going to run for president. He is going to have the election, and he's going to stand for and put it to the vote. And look, I know that it's Russia, but according to all international observers, all of their elections have been relatively free and fair. And so, if you're thinking this is going to be during the Soviet times, and well, of course he'll win because he's running. Look, I don't know. I don't have the internal situations there, but what I'm telling you is the image and the optics are terrible. We have one guy saying he's a democracy and he's fighting for freedom and accusing the other guy of being a totalitarian, but you have the so-called Democrat shutting down the media, shutting down the political parties, shutting down religions he doesn't like, firing people that he doesn't agree with, putting people in jail if they say the wrong things, and he's not going to run for election, while the so-called totalitarian is running for election. You see how that doesn't look good. You see how the situations are just not going to supporting the image that this is fighting for freedom. It's not. Vladimir Putin is no Democrat. Okay, he is not a democratic. He's not a freedom-loving guy. He's a guy who is a strong man and does want to stay in power. And he's going to do whatever he needs to do to take that happen. So there's no defense of him at all. They're doing whatever they want to do over there. But let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not pretend that the guy on this side is actually some, white hat good guy, because he's also a guy who wants power and wants to stay in power. And he wants to do whatever it takes to win a war. That's fair enough as it is. But let's be honest about it. Let's don't say he's a Democrat and he's actually fighting for freedom, because he's not. He's fighting for his position. He's fighting for his country. And let him do that. He can do whatever he wants. But when we're talking about what the United States ought to do, when we're talking about should we give money to something that's not working, and it's not what we're claiming it is, then we do need to slow down. We do need to give serious thought to whether we should do that. Now, in Putin's comments earlier today, he's saying from a position of confidence, because he has weathered the best that Ukraine can throw at him. And now that he's marshaling more and more troops of his own, and even if it's this slow, methodical thing, it's not likely that Ukraine can continue to hold on. That's why Putin has confidence to make that statement. You either have a negotiated settlement or we're going to settle it by force of arms. That's what he said. And there's every reason to believe that's what he's going to do. And folks, if you've been watching this show at all, you know that we have shown you very graphically why Ukraine cannot win this war militarily. They cannot do it. So if we ignore that ground truth reality, and if we continue to go after the sound bites and say, oh, he's fighting for democracy, so give him more money, all we're going to end up doing is causing more death. We're going to facilitate Ukraine to keep fighting a losing war, a fight they can't win. And it's unlikely, the most likely outcome, I can't predict the future, things can always change. But the most likely outcome is that Russia is going to win more territory. They're going to take more of the land that currently is in Ukraine's possession. They're going to destroy more Ukrainian cities. They're going to kill more Ukrainian civilians, and probably tens of thousands of additional Ukrainian armed forces will die for nothing. Now, how is it in America's interest to facilitate that, to give 60 billion more of our dollars towards something that has almost no chance of success? It doesn't make any sense. It's not in America's interest. It's not in freedom's interest, folks. Look, if we care about the Ukrainian people, and I care about Ukrainian people more than almost anybody over here, I promise you, I am highly motivated to keep more of these Ukrainian people alive, because it pains me to see them dying on a daily basis, trying to accomplish the militarily unattainable. It's just heartbreaking, because I know that behind every one of those military deaths, there's families that are devastated, that'll never recover in some cases. It's terrible. It's heartbreaking. I want to see that end. And if we can acknowledge the truth that Ukraine can't win on the ground, then the best thing we can do for Ukraine is to use this opportunity in Congress for them to not pass the budget to get this money out there, is to say what we need to do is to tell Zelensky the money is coming to an end. We're not going to give you a bunch of planes and tanks and armored personnel carriers and all this stuff, another batch. We're going to give you enough to hold the line and to defend what you got, so that you can negotiate from a position of strength, so that you can have a chance to say, hey, we'll negotiate the line right here, but if you try to go further, we're going to make the price very high. And then that might give Putin reason to say, you know what, that makes sense. Let's negotiate here. Because I believe you can take Putin at his word on this one. If he doesn't get a negotiation now, he will keep going. And folks, if he gets going far enough, and if the Ukraine army starts to collapse, he won't negotiate anymore. Then he's just going to go as far as he wants to. And that could be, as John Mearsheimer said on our show a couple of days ago, that could be 4 additional oblasts. Putin's not going to go to the border with NATO. He has no interest, no capacity, and no possibility of taking the Western Ukraine. He doesn't even want it. He wants a buffer in between there. He wants his security. And so he's content to leave that a rump state. So he doesn't want that. But he does have the possibility of taking, especially Odessa in the south, Kharkiv in the north, and perhaps some others in between there for the contiguous defense there, if that's what he chooses to do. Let's don't give him a chance to choose that. Instead, let's help Ukraine do what they don't want to do, but what is in their interest, and definitely ours, is to end the war, bring it to a negotiated end so that the killing stops, and that then Ukraine can start finally to recover from this devastating war and at least have a chance to start rebuilding. Because the longer we wait, the higher the cost, and the longer it's going to take for whatever is left over to recover. If we care about Ukraine, folks, that's what we should do. That's your deep dive for today. And we're going to continue to be unintimidated and uncompromised in bringing you the truth, the hard truth, even if it's something people don't want to hear, because there is a solution to this. Don't listen to those people like Kirby who say, no, we have to give Ukraine everything with no strings or all this bad stuff's going to happen. No, we don't have to do that. There are alternatives. And I just laid it out for you here. Let's hope that the White House is actually watching this, because, well, they would benefit from it too. But we're going to be here for you, and we will see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.